The PM, the Finance Minister, the Treasurer Jim Chalmers are all there too. Let's listen in.
In here as the difference that it makes to people's lives out there. And my government has always been focused on making Australians' lives better. We know that we have more work to do on cost of living, but we're making progress. We understand the pressure that people are under as a result of the global inflation surge, but the action that my government has taken, led by these two fine economic ministers here with me this morning, is making a positive difference. We started the year by delivering a tax cut for every single Australian taxpayer, and we're ending it by delivering more help for households. The number one priority of my government is to continue providing support. My message is we have your back. This week, we continued to deliver our agenda, working hard to make Australians' lives better, holding supermarkets to account to get fairer prices at the checkout, 80,000 new homes for renters, helping 40,000 Australians to be able to buy a home, historic aged care reform to give Australians the dignity and respect that they deserve in their later years, fairer childcare fees for parents and fairer wages for childcare workers, tens of thousands of new jobs in manufacturing powered by clean energy through our Future Made in Australia plan, world-leading action to make sure social media companies meet their social responsibility. Social media is doing harm to our children. And today, as a direct result of our legislation passed through the Parliament yesterday, through the Senate and confirmed in the House today, parents can have a different discussion with their young ones, a different discussion that will result in better outcomes and less harm for young Australians. Platforms now have a social responsibility to ensure the safety of our kids is a priority for them. We're making sure that mums and dads can have that different conversation today and in future days. We've got your back is our message to Australian parents. Now, I want to pay tribute to Katie Gallagher, not just here as Finance Minister, but as the Manager of Government Business in the Senate. This week, the Senate passed 45 pieces of legislation, and I think 8 of them, were Treasury bills. 11 were Treasury bills, making a real difference as well. So I'll turn to Katie and then Jim, and then we'll take a few questions.
Thanks very much, Prime Minister. Well, at the beginning of this parliamentary fortnight, the final fortnight, the PM made it clear that he wanted to see legislation get through the Senate. And we were able to do that. So I took those instructions seriously. We worked hard across the chamber and got an extraordinary result. I think many of you have watched how the Senate operates. Sometimes it's a frustrating chamber, to say the least, and difficult to progress legislation, particularly when you've got an opposition that doesn't want to see any reform passed. And so working across the chamber with the PM's leadership, we were able to convince a majority of the Senate that those 45 bills were important bills to get through. And as the PM said, they cover a range of areas, but important reforms in aged care, in social media, in wages for early childhood educators, in a whole range of Treasury areas. These were really important bills, and now that certainty's been provided, we are able to get moving in all of those areas where that legislation applies. So it was a big night. You don't often get a 37-page guillotine and about 6 hours of votings with the bells going. I don't know if any of you were in here, but they rang pretty consistently from about 6 o'clock until 11:30 last night. But at the end of the day, we passed 31 bills yesterday and 45 bills through the week, which I don't think is quite the record, but it's certainly right up there with getting important legislation through and getting the job done and delivering on the PM's clear message, which was we need this stuff through the Senate.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks very much, PM and Katie. I really just want to pay tribute to these two, the PM for his leadership and Katie for really the most extraordinary effort last night. We are grateful every day for the opportunity to work with Katie Gallagher, but especially last night. For those of us who don't speak fluent Senate, It is such a wonderful opportunity for us to work closely with Katie to deliver the government's agenda, particularly when it comes to our economic policy agenda. So I take responsibility for 11 Treasury bills that passed last night, but I take absolutely none of the credit for their passage. The credit for that belongs to Katie and to the Prime Minister as well. This is a very big week for economic reform right across the board. Tax reform, housing, super objective, future made in Australia, consumer protections in buy now, pay later, competition policy, getting a better deal for people at the checkout, and the Reserve Bank reforms as well. This is what progress and delivery looks like. We've been able to focus primarily on the cost of living and the fight against inflation at the same time as we keep the wheels of economic reform turning. Our strategy has three parts: relief, repair and reform. And last night we took huge steps when it comes to economic reform in our economy. Later today I'll also be hosting the state and territory treasurers to advance our very substantial agenda of economic reform. We will be progressing the Productivity Fund with the states, which is all about productivity reform, but also housing and competition policy as well. So a huge week for economic reform. We've done a lot. We know that there is still a lot to do. But what we saw in the Senate last night was really the triumph of outcomes over politics. The triumph of outcomes and delivery and progress over the kind of petty, nasty, negative politics being played by our opponents. The coalition has completely vacated the field on the economy, completely vacated the field on the cost of living and on economic reform. You know, we are at the end of the last full parliamentary year before an election, and they still don't have any costed, credible or coherent economic policies. And I raise that to make the contrast with the really quite amazing progress that Katie and the colleagues were able to make in the Senate under the Prime Minister's leadership. I thank them again for the progress that's been made. I also acknowledge the work of all of our senators and the crossbench as well. The best kind of economic reform is bipartisan, but when the coalition has vacated the field, we have no choice but to make progress with the crossbench. I acknowledge them and I acknowledge these two in particular.